welcome to this, the first of our modern rounds here on the final day before we cut to the top 4 at the World Championship here in Seattle. We have two absolute titans of the game that are playing and really trying to cement themselves in this field. On the first left-hand side of our main feature table, that man, Braun-Duin. He is our Grand Prix master. He's having a fantastic tournament here, and he's brought with him a deck that he's fairly comfortable with in Modern, but there's a comparatively new one in Bant Eldrazi. And on the other side of things, Jiachen Tao, he considers himself a limited master, but you know what? He's got a great constructed deck too here. One of the more intriguing ones in the field. Tell us a little about this one, Ian.
Yeah, JC is actually here with white-black tokens. He's playing a Bitter Blossom deck, which is something we've seen pop up now and again in Modern, but you know, not something that has been a mainstay of the format consistently throughout Modern's history.
It's going to be an interesting one. I'm looking forward to seeing the likes of Bitter Blossom coming into play. I'm really hoping to see plenty of removal. I mean, we know that there's lots of Thoughtseize decks, lots of Inquisition of Kozilek decks in the field. That's something that sort of is more of an understood factor in Modern, but something like Intangible Virtue, well, that's a little bit special.
Yeah, indeed it is.
So these players just sort of psyching themselves out, a big moment for them as they try and just sort of get their head in the right space, ready to play this.
As long as you don't know my 7 cards.
We have a lot of interesting stuff going on here. Tell us a little bit about the Bant Eldrazi deck as well, Ian. I mean, the Bant deck, we thought the Eldrazi were dead. It turns out they've still got a few little moves in their bag.
Yeah, this is the descendant of the Eldrazi decks that we saw show up in a huge way at Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch. In fact, it was Jiachen Tao who actually won the Pro Tour with the sort of original version of the Eldrazi deck, the fully powered version. Now it is BBD playing the Eldrazi deck here, of course, with Eye of Ugin being banned. He's leaning on Eldrazi Temple as his only special Eldrazi land alone, and in order to accelerate out those big Eldrazi, he's actually going to green for Noble Hierarch.
Lovely stuff. And of course, Jiachen Tao, well familiar with the likes of Eldrazi Sky Spawner that may be coming down for Braun-Duin very soon indeed. Interested to see how this matchup plays out. I mean, interested to see how all of these Modern matchups play out. Obviously, this about the highest pressure set of matches that you could possibly hope for. That's what we get at the World Championship. By the time that we get to Saturday, every one of these matches counts, not just for the pro points involved, but because at the end of today, we'll know our final 4.
Indeed, Tim. And just to sort of give everyone a character of what we're going to see in this matchup here, this is a pretty fair matchup as far as Modern is concerned. Often Modern decks are characterized by trying to win very quickly or trying to win in a non-interactive way, sort of bypassing what their opponent is doing and ending the game with a specialized combo or a very aggressive start. But these decks are actually looking to interact with each other in a pretty normal way. So BBD's Eldrazi deck is characterized by huge creatures. He's going to want to get those out, maybe disrupt JC a little bit and attack for a lot of damage all at once. JC, on the other hand, with his tokens deck, is trying to go wide with a lot of little creatures and pump them up, sort of stave off BBD's big monsters, and eventually kind of overwhelm BBD with lots of tokens.
And the thing that I think is pretty cool about both these decks, they both have white, which means they both have access to some of the best sideboard options in Modern. And to me, Modern is all about sideboarding in.
Turns out the theater.
Yeah, it absolutely is. We won't tip our hands as far as the sideboarding is going just quite yet. We'll wait until we get into the deeper games here, but it looks like we are approaching, getting ready to start game 1 here.
Yeah. Kaladesh is, of course, the format where we're going to get a chance to see gremlins. I understand there have been a couple of gremlins just in terms of sound for what's going on here, so that's the slight delay that we've had on just getting this round started. But these players, they will be going soon enough.
So a couple interesting points about the exact deck list of these players here. BBD is playing the full 4 copies of Eldrazi Displacer, a card which is really powerful against token strategies. Of course, it can exile a creature and return it to the battlefield, but if that creature is a token, it simply won't return at all. So if the game goes long, those Eldrazi Displacers are going to be a really key card for BBD here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that what JC is going to be hoping is that he can simply flood the board before that happens. I mean, typically your regular old-fashioned Eldrazi decks sometimes struggled against the decks that are simply putting a lot of threats on the battlefield because you just have a point where you can't really attack through in any profitable fashion.
Yeah, that's definitely true. If there's one key weakness of the Eldrazi deck is that it doesn't deal with a lot of creatures all at once very well. And that's exactly what JC is going to be trying to do. So I think what JC is going to want to see here is a fast start, ideally with a turn 2 Bitter Blossom into Lingering Souls, and just trying to get a whole bunch of flyers up in the air right away. BBD he can't really block flyers very well, and he also can't really sweep the board very well. So his only option at that point would be to race. And if JC can throw him off with a little bit of hand disruption, then things will be in pretty good shape. That said, BBD actually does have one kind of spicy addition to his deck here, which is one copy of Engineered Explosives. So if you can see that card here, it's a really efficient way to sweep away a whole bunch of tokens all at once.
Yeah, of course, every token having a converted mana cost of 0, and when it comes to activating Engineered Explosives, that makes life very easy indeed. But these players, they're just going to kick things off now, and we're going to get a chance to see exactly how this one plays out. If you're looking for early plays, look out for a Bitter Blossom from JC Tao, probably the highest impact thing that we're going to see on the first couple of turns. Ancient Stirrings here. One of the sort of plus points of playing an Eldrazi deck with green is that you do have a very efficient bit of card searching, card drawing here. But looks like Braun-Duin's opening hand here, very heavy on mana, not so heavy on threats. Got a Matter Reshaper for turn 2, thanks to Eldrazi Temple. Looking at another 5 and trying to find a colorless card. So that will either be an Eldrazi, an artifact, or, well, as it turns out, yet another land. Not exactly what Braun-Duin would have been hoping for there.
Yeah, ideally the best start for these Bant Eldrazi decks is starting off with a Noble Hierarch, but BBD sort of has the second best here in an Eldrazi Temple, also accelerating his mana here, and the Ancient Stirrings helping him to fix his draw and hopefully follow up with some additional threats.
Well, Spellskite is a 0/4, will be able to block that Mana Reshaper very nicely. Not too many targeted abilities to worry about, but Noble Hierarch, the Exalted there, meaning that a 4/3 Matter Reshaper is not something that Spellskite particularly wanted to block. JC drops down to 16 as he goes into his third turn here. Now, Liliana of the Veil, kind of a nice one. It will mean that he can force a sacrifice on one of Braun-Duin's creatures if he so chooses, or he could start attacking that hand. Alternatively, I guess that he does have the option of going for both Intangible Virtue and a Path to Exile. That kind of a longer-term plan, I guess.
Yeah, Liliana comes down here actually using the +1 ability. I like that a lot because if JC were to force BBD to sacrifice a creature, it could either just simply sacrifice that Noble Hierarch, which is pretty low impact at this point in the game, or sacrifice the Matter Reshaper, and you actually get a card out of it as well. So I think JC just deciding to kind of defense up behind that Spellskite. He does have a Sorin Solemn Visitor in his hand as well.
Well, you mentioned that Eldrazi Displacer could be a big game in this particular matchup, and it's already come down, and with the Temple there to provide additional mana, it meant that Braun-Duin was able to use it very aggressively just to simply push through a little bit of extra damage here. Liliana gets taken down by attacks, and JC Tao continues to advance his mana situation there with a Polluted Delta searching up. I mean, I guess probably just a swamp there so he can save a little bit on damage in this early game.
So JC here, he does have a Path to Exile in his hand that'll be ready for that Eldrazi Displacer when he is ready to do that. So he's not fearing that tremendously right now. In the meantime, gets down another Liliana, uses the +1 here, trying to strip both players of resources.
Unfortunately for him, I mean, what he didn't realize, and there's really no way that he could have, is that Braun-Duin is basically working with a huge amount of lands in hand. So the Liliana +1, not as effective as it might be in some other games, but still doesn't mean that it's a bad choice by JC. He's obviously not working with the same information that we are.
And a big pickup here for BBD. He has actually drawn a Reality Smasher this turn.
Yeah, against tokens, this one pretty potent. Just Trample is a very powerful ability. And of course, if there's any targeted removal from JC, which there would need to be given the number of creatures on the board, it's going to at least cost JC a card.
So JC now being attacked. Reality Smasher is pointed at Liliana. The Matter Reshaper and Eldrazi Displacer are coming for JC himself. He does have a Spellskite, which can block one of those 3-power creatures. He also has Path to Exile. But before he blocks, just thinking things through here, deciding what he wants to path and how he wants to block.
Yeah, JC now kind of on the back foot. It's funny because we saw a start from BBD that looked relatively innocuous. There weren't too many threats in hand. The Ancient Stirrings cast on turn 1 did not really find anything especially helpful. But you know what? These Eldrazi, each one that you draw is high impact enough that even that kind of start hasn't hurt Braun-Duin at all. So now JC finally electing to make Braun-Duin sacrifice a creature, and it looks like the Noble Hierarch going to the bin there. Brian happy to just keep around his Eldrazi. Mattery Shaper working fairly nicely here just as a regular attacker, even with a blocker on the other side of things because of that Eldrazi Displacer that can tap down the Spellskite.
JC in quite a bit of trouble here. Getting low on life, very low on cards, staring down some pretty big threats here.
Thought Seer coming down and seeing just a land in JC Tao's hand. Ghost Quarter there. At this point, Ghost Quarter not really going to be doing too much. It is nice to be able to take out an Eldrazi Temple or similar, but at this point, Brian has plenty of lands to work with. And Liliana goes down, and at this point, JC Tao's life total is the main thing that's going to be dropping fast.
Yeah, JC's back is really up against the wall here. I don't see too much he can draw here. Look, we're looking at the closing turns of the game here. It looks like BBD's start was just too fast. These huge Eldrazi are coming through, and JC does scoop them up. That is game 1 going to Braun-Duin.
Is this what you played?
So we will have a lot more Magic for you this round. Of course, Modern, we're going to see these games going thick and fast. But in the meantime, we do have a few messages for you.
Do you want to play in the next Pro Tour? Qualify through an upcoming Magic Online PTQ. Download Magic Online and learn more at mtgo.com.
Up your game with Ultra Pro Magic the Gathering accessories. Find the best Magic art on card sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, and more. Visit ultrapro.com to learn more and find a retailer near you.
Hello and welcome back to this, our World Championship here in Seattle. Now, one of the cool things about Modern, Ian, we do have fast games, and what that means is we're going to get a chance to show you an awful lot of Magic this round. As the two players on our main table do their sideboarding and shuffle up, we're going to jump across to one of our other matches, this one between another couple of competitors who are very much in the thick of things to go far in this tournament. On the left of our screen, that's Thiago Saporito from Brazil. On the right, Luis Scott Vargas, and both of these players on variations of an Abzan list.
That's right, yeah. They're both playing Abzan, although they each have their own versions, quite different from each other. The one common thing here is that both versions are playing Grim Flayer, a new addition from Eldritch Moon that actually fits quite well in the Modern format. This is a 2/2 creature that gets +2/+2 if you have Delirium, and it can also fix the top of your library as well when it attacks. So in particular in the modern format, Grim Flayer picks up a lot because it is so easy to fill up your graveyard with different card types and fits well in a deck that's using Tarmogoyf anyway.
Yeah, the other cool thing I think that has meant that we've seen more Grim Flayers in these Abzan lists than perhaps in Jund lists is sometimes you get to discard Lingering Souls, and Lingering Souls, of course, are a very powerful card that you can flash back from the graveyard. We can see just the one Spirit token in play from Thiago Saporito that's almost certainly the remnants of a copy of Lingering Souls at some point earlier in the game. Looks like both these players kind of living off the top of their decks a little bit here. Grim Flayer squaring off against Saporito's Spirit token. That token looks fairly innocuous at the moment, but with Gavany Township in play, it can gradually grow a little bit out of hand. Saporito has the Maelstrom Pulse for Grim Flayer, so now he's the only one with a threat on the board, aside from a Shambling Vent there, sorry, for Luis.
So when we tuned into this match just a couple moments ago, Tim, things were looking pretty good for Luis. He had the life total advantage. He had the only large threat on the board, getting in some damage as well with Shambling Vent. But that Maelstrom Pulse was a huge pickup there for Thiago, taking out the Grim Flayer. And now the flashback Lingering Souls giving him quite a numerous board here. And if that Gavany Township can get online, that's going to be bad news here for Luis.
Yeah, then no need to play additional spells here for Thiago Saporito. Quite happy to pump up his team. This is a big attack here, coming in for a full 7 damage. Luis going down to 8, and with the active Gavany Township, he's going to have to play some removal or some kind of a blocker this turn if he wants to stay in the game. Luis checking through at Saporito's graveyard. Even if it works out that Saporito is able to take the game right here, he wants to make sure that he knows as much as possible for sideboarding going into game 2. While in this modern set of rounds, the players will have access to full deck lists next round. For this round, everything is kind of a surprise, so he's kind of having to wing it based on his experience and knowledge of the format. And Scavenging Ooze, it can't block any of these flyers, but one thing it can do is offer a little bit of extra life for Luis here. Thiago Saporito carefully just weighing up exactly how much damage he can deal.
Yeah, Thiago with representing 10 damage on board there. If he does activate Gavany Township this turn, that Scavenging Ooze giving Luis option to gain 1 more life there. So Thiago decides not to pump, instead spending his mana on Abrupt Decay on the Scavenging Ooze, and again leaving himself representing a lethal board for next turn. We'll see what Luis can pick up.
Well, he picks up all of the cards. So Thiago Saporito picking up his first game. Basically, what we're going to be trying to do throughout this this format is show you as much Magic as possible, as many look-ins as possible. We are going to jump back to our main match, though, between Braun-Duin and Jiachen Tao. These guys, we saw a great game from them in game 1 where it was a simple Eldrazi beatdown plan. I'm really interested to see whether or not JC can bounce back after sideboarding here against a deck that's a relatively known quantity in the modern field these days.
Yeah, absolutely true there, Tim. I think things potentially get a little bit better for JC here. He can bring in some more spot removal. He does have a copy of Damnation in his sideboard as well, which is a huge tool against the Eldrazi. But ultimately, a lot of this is going to come down to who gets the better start. So let's see how things are panning out. Turn 1 Noble Hierarch, huge for BBD here. Absolutely one of the best early starts the Eldrazi deck can get. But then on the other hand, for JC, he does have his turn 2 Bitter Blossom. So both decks doing exactly what they want to do in the early game here. And things are going to come down to who can power through into the mid game with a stronger draw.
Yeah, Bitter Blossom, just an absolute powerhouse. It took a long time to find a home in Modern, actually. It was one of those cards that, once it became available to Modern players to play with, everyone assumed that it would immediately mean the resurgence of a classic Fairies deck. That never really quite came to fruition, but in Black-White tokens, it is a very, very potent card indeed, powering out a flying 1/1 Fairy token every turn, and we've already established that the Eldrazi deck, not super strong against flyers, though we do see Eldrazi Sky Spawner coming down for BBD here. That will provide him both with an Eldrazi Spawn token on the ground and a creature that's going to be able to tussle with the fairies in the air. Now, Bitter Blossom will be costing JC Tao a life each and every turn, but that's something that typically isn't a worry because if he needs to be blocking with them, he's saving more life than it's costing him.
And this fast start from BBD into an Eldrazi Sky Spawner is a huge deal there. We do see JC Tao on 2 copies of Liliana, but he has picked up a Zealous Persecution, which is just a huge draw for him there. Those tokens were really clogging up his ability to make use of his Lilianas, and being able to sweep away 3 creatures all at once. Not only a huge deal in that it clears the board right away, but it also makes those Lilianas so much more potent going into these later turns.
Now you'll see at various points JC putting a die on top of his deck. That's basically a reminder to him of the upkeep of Bitter Blossom putting a token into play. Equally, he's keeping his tokens sort of on either side of that Bitter Blossom. Now what that means, the one that's just come into play does not have haste. He just wants to make it clear which one can attack and which one can't.
Combat.
So Liliana attacking hands for now because there are no creatures to attack. Meanwhile, that Fairy Rogue getting stuck in. This is exactly where JC Tao wants to be.
And strategically, I really like JC's use of his Lilianas in these 2 games here, attacking BBD's hand. The Eldrazi deck both requires a lot more mana to cast its creatures, and its creatures are more impact per card than JC's. So that, even though it's a symmetric ability making each player discard, the fact that JC has the better board and the fact that BBD's cards kind of hit harder pound for pound means that it's to JC's benefit to attack each player's hand.
4.
And it looks like in terms of what JC has going on in that hand, Well, there's a couple of copies of Intangible Virtue. This is a card that, when you have a few tokens going on, becomes very, very powerful indeed. It's going to mean that all of his tokens will have +1/+1 and Vigilance. The Vigilance a really big deal, actually, because it means that the tokens which might normally have been being held back to block can just keep on swinging in each and every turn, and obviously they're doing that much more damage.
That's definitely true, Tim. Even a single copy of Intangible Virtue in this matchup is a really big deal because so many of the Eldrazi creatures are like in the 3/3 to 4/4 range. So being able to make your tokens into 2/2s, attack with them, and also leave them to double block is just a really big problem for BBD to deal with.
Sure. Combat. Yep. 4.
So he just, the slightest nudge of those fairies hitting the red zone, getting in there for a full 4 points of damage. Braun-Duin dropping down to 12 life there.
And of course, the big deal here, Tim, is that BBD has not found a colorless source for his lands yet. That is why he did not cast a spell on the last turn. Did just find ability here to cast Thought Not Seer.
Okay.
Gets Path to Exiled immediately
And then I search for lands. And then, yeah.
with the trigger on the stack.
Yeah, we'll just look at this now.
So it will be that Braun-Duin can make sure that there's only the one Intangible Virtue, but slight diminishing returns on the second one because the Vigilance is a fairly important feature within what Intangible Virtue is doing, and that, of course, doesn't stack up. I'm sure that JC would not have minded too much to see an additional +1/+1 on all of his creatures, but you know what? A little bit of pump is doing the job pretty well anyway.
Now we are certainly in the home stretch of the game here. JC taking a look at BBD's hand with Thoughtseize, getting in for just a tremendous amount of damage with these fairy tokens and setting up for lethal the following turn.
Yep.
You know what? When this black-white tokens deck is all rolling, it looks easy.
Nice. 6. I'm at 6. Cool.
And here's a pretty cool addition from JC. That was a Asylum Visitor cast for Madness off of Liliana of the Veil.
Yeah, a little bit of extra card drawing. Very interesting choice there. Not one that I've seen in Modern at all thus far. Intrigued to potentially catch up with JC and find out the details of how that one got included. But we're going to get a chance to jump back and see a little bit more of the matchup, more of one of our other matchups at a different table here. I think that we're going to get a chance to see Shota Yasuoka playing Modern, and I've heard that each and every one of the Japanese players at this tournament have brought a really cool deck for Modern, so very intrigued to see what Shota's got going on here. It does look like in his matchup against Marcio Carvalho, on the face of things, we have two Abzan lists. In practice, though, I'm not convinced that these Abzan lists are playing quite the same game as one another. Marcio, by the looks of things, looking at his deck list, is on kind of a classic Abzan list. We can see the Tarmogoyf, we can see Liliana, though. In this case, it is Liliana of the Lost Hope. But Shota Yasuoka, we're hearing, well, this is a kind of a tricky one for our life total guys. He is currently at functionally infinite life. He's already been able to assemble the combo of Kitchen Finks alongside Viscera Seer and Malira, or indeed potentially Anna Fenza in that place as well, and assemble enough life that he is functionally unassailable on the pure life basis. On the other side of things, of course, Marcio Carvalho does need to worry about that sort of thing. It may well be that he's playing this out either for the purposes of finding out more information, or perhaps thinking that he's going to be able to deck Shota Yasuoka. Yeah, it says 999 there, but you know what? Even if Liliana of the Lost Hope goes ultimate, starts powering out an exponential amount of zombies, we are informed that the amount of life that Shota has going on, he recognized that Liliana of the Lost Hope is a potential and picked a fantastically, absurdly large number, which is a very smart thing to do, because as Frank Carsten figured out when he was doing the maths on Liliana of the Lost Hope's ability, he realized that actually you do need to choose something, a number just frantically, absurdly larger than you might think, in order to be completely confident that you're not going to have to worry about all of those zombies. Very interesting board state that's going on here.
Yeah, it looks to me, Tim, looking through the deck lists here, that I don't see a great way for Marcio to actually win through that unlimited life combination. He may just be kind of feeling things out, trying to play for the possibility of decking Shota, but ultimately things looking very good for Shota here at a essentially infinite amount of life. So we're going to bounce back to one of our other matches here in just a moment for you all.
Yeah, we're going to see our main table between BBD and JC Tao. We'll give you updates of how that game's going, but when one plays on infinite life, sometimes games can take a little bit of time. Noble Hierarch the play here for Braun-Duin on the very first turn of the game. That's what he wanted to see. And a basic swamp for JC Tao, but by the looks of things, no Thoughtseize, just a fairly quiet one. Matter Reshaper coming down for Braun-Duin here.
Yeah, another fantastic start for BBD here. This time he has Noble Hierarch on turn 1, as well as Colorless Mana right away, straight into that Matter Reshaper. We will see what JC can come up with as a response.
Yeah, the Brushland, a very important piece of the puzzle there for BBD, able to produce Colorless Mana, getting his Eldrazi online.
So taking a peek at JC's hand here, it looks like he does have Path to Exile as an answer to Matter Reshaper. Also really important here, he has his copy of Damnation in his hand, which is a huge, potentially huge card against the Eldrazi deck. Just being able to sweep away a bunch of large creatures. But down comes Thought-Knot Seer for BBD. This is absolutely a brutal curve. Noble Hierarch into Matter Reshaper, into Thought-Knot Seer. One of the best possible starts this Bant Eldrazi deck can have. Gets to take a peek at JC's hand. We will see what he decides to take.
I mean, that Damnation has to be a relatively exciting target for him here. That's the one that's going to mean that even if BBD gets well ahead, he can, just sweep these creatures all off the board. Timely Reinforcement's a relatively important card in terms of keeping things going. Vault of the Archangel, kind of a nice one if there are lots of tokens in play, again, for making blocking work out well.
And note here that JC did Path to Exile the Thought-Knot Seer in response to the Thought-Knot Seer's trigger. So what actually happens is JC gets to draw his card first, and then afterwards BBD takes a peek at his hand.
And that was basically the one operative card that he had going on right that moment. He didn't want to have to lose that one without being able to get a little bit of value, get the big threat off the board.
I'll start over again on the writing, but I just want to be able to get it all. Lily, cut, nation, faults.
Now BBD, taking notes here, talk us through, Ian, why you might do that in a game.
Let's see.
So whenever you have information about a player's hand, it's always just a great idea to write it down. That player isn't obligated to remind you later on what cards you saw or to play with their hand face up. Plus, sometimes players do that as a courtesy to each other. But, in a professional game of Magic at this high of a level, you just want to write down any information you can get so you can reference it later. And yes, indeed, you are allowed to take notes in a match and reference them as long as those notes are visible to both players.
Yeah, the other thing, of course, being that it doesn't disrupt the overall time of the game too much. If you extirpate your opponent and get a chance to look at their deck, you're probably not going to be able to get away with writing down all the cards that are in it unless you're able to write just spectacularly fast.
Discard one of them. I have to think about what I'm discarding, though.
So BBD did choose to take away Timely Reinforcements from JC, indicating that he's looking to end the game quickly. He doesn't want JC to get that stalling value out of Timely Reinforcements. It also leaves JC only with Liliana of the Veil as a turn 3 play, and of course that Liliana extremely vulnerable to the Matter Reshaper plus Noble Hierarch attacking for 4. So not a lot of value gotten there from Liliana for JC. Unfortunately for BBD, no follow-up that turn. Despite his excellent start, he has run out of steam a little bit, so not putting a ton more pressure on the board here, just that Matter Reshaper chipping away for 4 each turn. Gives JC a little bit of time, which is just what he needs here.
Yeah, he's drawn an Asylum Visitor, which is his first real creature of the game. He's had plenty going on in terms of disruption, but ideally that disruption best deployed when you already have some kind of a threat on the board, and that's the reason that we saw Bitter Blossom being so effective in Game 2. In Game 2 there, where he was able to get it down and then use disruption while building up threats. This time round, he's got the disruption, but not too much else going on.
So JC simply opting to pass the turn here, does not have a 4th land, leaves himself with a couple of options. He has Zealous Persecution and Murderous Cut, both as options here. Right now, the Zealous
Not too late.
Persecution only capable of taking out the Noble Hierarch, but that is relevant because JC has a second copy of Liliana in the Veil. So if BBD does nothing with his turn and simply attacks the Matter Reshaper, we could see a Zealous Persecution end of turn taking out the Noble Hierarch into a Liliana on JC's following turn, -2 taking out the Matter Reshaper. Now, of course, BBD does get to draw a card and potentially put another permanent onto the battlefield when Matter Reshaper dies.
Sure.
And it looks like actually firing off the Zealous Persecution on the upkeep there rather than waiting until the end of the turn.
Yeah, that meaning that only 2 points of damage coming through from the Matter Reshaper rather than any more. It, of course, is shrunk by -1/-1 also. And JC, yeah, still not got much going on in the way of threats right here. Has picked up a 4th land, and a Ghost Quarter at this stage in the game, again, doesn't really have as much utility taking out key lands. I mean, there are a lot of important lands in Modern. If you happen to be playing against one of the Abzan decks, taking a Gavany Township is lovely, of course. Right now, though, it's simply another land that taps for mana.
Now, really noteworthy here, Tim, JC did pick up his 4th land, and he would absolutely love to cast Liliana of the Veil -2 and also leave up the option to cast Murderous Cut, but he actually only has 2 black sources. So you can see he was leaving that Ghost Quarter there untapped, does not have access to Murderous Cut this turn cycle. But fortunately for him, nothing too threatening hit off the Matter Reshaper there, and we may see Liliana survive to the next untap for JC. And indeed we do. So this game has turned around quite a bit here, Tim. Looked like an awesome start for BBD, just everything he could want on the first 3 turns. But he's flooding out a bit here now, and things are kind of shifting back into JC's favor. He's able to stabilize with that Planeswalker. Now he has an Asylum Visitor on the battlefield and a couple of removal spells in hand for when BBD does actually draw some threats.
The Asylum Visitor, of course, best friends with Liliana for a number of reasons. First off, of course, Madness, meaning it can get cast when it's being discarded to Lily, but also, if Lily keeps attacking hands, sooner or later, you know, you may find yourself getting a few additional cards with that 3/1.
JC picking up a Plains for the turn, just deciding a little bit how he's going to sequence. He is planning on plussing Liliana, so decides to discard the Plains rather than play it. He's pretty happy with the cards he has in his hand right now. He's got that Murderous Cut, he's got a Damnation. Asylum Visitor met with Path to Exile. Can't imagine JC's too sad about that. He gets to pick up a land off of it, and still in a commanding board state here.
Cards? One? Just one.
Yeah, Brian only has Engineered Explosives in hand now, and it may have to consider keeping an extra bonus card in hand just to protect it from a Liliana activation. Though now that Bitter Blossom's in play, he has a much stronger incentive to actually use that explosive.
Ancient Stirring's a huge pickup here for BBD. He'd love to see a Reality Smasher this turn. Doesn't look like he found one. There is option for, I think that's a Drowner of Hope.
Absolutely, yeah, and that would
Eldrazi,
be
Sky
a big
Spawner,
one.
or Matter Reshaper here. So a couple good options for him.
I'm deciding, yeah. Okay.
Brian would love for that to have just been his hand a few turns ago. Just full of threats, and with all of those lands in play, he would be able to play a few of them. We've seen Ancient Stirrings in a number of different Modern decks playing different roles. I mean, in something like the Amulet Bloom deck, it was simply, let's find an artifact, let's find a land. Here, I mean, you can see the monsters on the artwork. It's kind of achieving its original role of finding some Eldrazi in addition to potentially finding land.
She's Matter Reshaper.
So BBD does go with the Matter Reshaper here, and what he's thinking about is he doesn't want to leave himself with just a single card in his hand. He doesn't want Liliana to strip that away.
Yeah.
So we will likely see him cast both the Matter Reshaper as well as the Engineered Explosives for 2 this turn, prepping up to take care of that Bitter Blossom.
Matter Reshaper.
There it is. Yeah, this is a much more colourful version of the Eldrazi build than the one that JC Tao won the Pro Tour with. Engineered Explosives coming down on 2 so that he will be able to deal with Bitter Blossom soon enough. Not before the very first Fairy Rogue token comes into play for JC Tao, though. Tao on 13, he's going to take a little bit of pain from that Bitter Blossom, not that he minds too much. Pick up his card for the turn.
Looks like the draw for the turn is second copy of Timely Reinforcements. Not going to do a whole lot for JC given the current board state, but that said, I still like JC's position quite a bit here.
We see there that Tao does have Delirium. Delirium, not necessarily a feature in his deck too much, but certainly one that in the likes of some of the Jund and Abzan decks, that are now running Grim Flayer, very much another player in this format.
So JC, I believe, opted simply to pass the turn here. Didn't activate Liliana in either direction. Doesn't necessarily want that Matter Reshaper to die and give BBD another card. Also doesn't want a +1 when BBD has no cards, but he himself does. So picking the often undervalued third mode of Liliana, which is simply not using an ability at all.
So there we see the Engineered Explosives taking out Bitter Blossom. We now back down to a relatively simple board, and Braun-Duin simply passing back, not playing any more threats. That die on top of JC Tao's deck no longer really relevant, not so much going on in upkeep as once there was. And now we see a plus from Liliana, a spare land in hand for JC Tao, not needed, a spare land in hand for Braun-Duin. Well, pretty similar. We have found ourselves in a bit of a staring contest, but it's a staring contest where JC Tao already has more cards in hand, which is going to be relevant at some point. And of course, Liliana can threaten an ultimate. I mean, right now the ultimate would basically be getting rid of some lands for Braun-Duin, but at some point that does become a little bit tricky for the Grand Prix Player of the Year.
Go to combat. I'm going to send Smasher at Liliana, Reshaper at you.
So Reality Smasher, awesome draw here for Braun-Duin. One of the best cards he could pick up, something he's kind of been waiting for all game to see and finally does see it. JC thinking about how to deal with this Reality Smasher. Of course, Reality Smasher's protective ability does require JC to discard a card if he wants to target it.
I mean, he has the mana available, if I'm not mistaken, that he would be able to activate Vault of the Archangel and block. Obviously, he would still be taking trample damage there. This way round, he's able to protect Liliana, even if it's costing him 2 cards to kill that Reality Smasher.
You're 19, right? I'm at 19 life, yep.
So Murderous Cut plus Damnation were what were required there. I think that now that they're playing empty-handed Magic, JC Tao kind of knows that Damnation, unlikely to be at its best. And Timely Reinforcements on that little window where he doesn't have any creatures, getting him 3 soldier tokens and 6 life. A massive swing there.
That's fine.
Yeah, and note that I believe JC did chump block the the Matter Reshaper with his Fairy last turn. That was in order to reduce his number of creatures to 0 to make sure he got the 3 tokens from Timely Reinforcements. So essentially trading away his Fairy token for 3 Soldier tokens. So really nice for him. And those tokens are going to be especially important, as you said, Tim, with that Vault of the Archangel. Means each one of those tokens can trade for a big Eldrazi, which is a huge, huge advantage here for JC Tao.
Little update from one of our back tables. Shota Yasuoka, he's shown that Marcio Carvalho is not indestructible in this tournament. Was able to take not just the first game against him, but also the second. Didn't need to go infinite in the second game, simply able to do it the old-fashioned way, if you will.
No.
Meanwhile, a huge update here. BBD has drawn a copy of Eldrazi Displacer, and as I mentioned earlier, Tim, this card very, very effective against tokens. It can exile them and would return them to the battlefield, but tokens, of course, just go away when they are exiled. They don't return. So this a veritable machine gun here for BBD if it does survive.
I'm going to sacrifice Matter Reshaper.
Yeah, now's the point where creatures are being forced to be sacrificed by Liliana. And an Eldrazi Temple, the replacement there. I don't think that JC Tao will be too sad about that. It certainly could have gone worse for him. But that machine gun, primed and loaded, already dealing with 2 of those soldier tokens. Just 1 left, and I think it's likely we're going to see that one go the same direction as its friends.
Displace that. Attack Liliana. Yep.
Wow, what a turnaround this has been. Eldrazi Displacer just perfectly dealing with everything that JC Tao had going on. And he's now the one that's just playing lands and saying go. This could be a nice pickup here for Braun-Duin in our deciding game here.
14. Okay. 13. Yep. And then I'm going to pass after that. 1 card? Yes.
So fetching up a Godless Shrine with that Marsh
Beautiful,
Flats.
beautiful man. Or Eldrazi or whatever you are.
JC really looking for a removal spell here. He absolutely needs to deal with that Eldrazi Displacer. Even something like a Lingering Souls really doesn't help him that much with BBD having so much mana. Every 3 mana he has access to can exile a token
and
permanently.
here's another Reality Smasher in. This a massive play from Braun-Duin. He does not want to leave this one to chance. He wants to be able to get the damage in fast and just deal with all of the remaining life points for JC Tao before he's able to draw into too much action.
Now it looks like JC has picked up a Path to Exile, so he does have ability to remove one of these 2 creatures, both super threatening in different ways. That Eldrazi Displacer shutting down all of JC's token production possibility, but the Reality Smasher just crashing in for so much damage does decide to go with the Reality Smasher as the target here, discarding Marsh Flats as well.
Smart play from JC to hold the extra land in hand there, because I think there's a lot of players that could be tempted to just get an extra bit of mana in play, but that would have left the Reality Smasher unable to be targeted with no cards to discard for JC Tao. Another Eldrazi Displacer here from Braun-Duin. They can buddy up, they can protect one another, and they can swing in. And there's the handshake from JC Tao. It did not take very long for that to turn around from being a relatively close-looking game of top-deck battles to just a decisive victory for Braun-Duin. Now, the cool thing about these rounds of Modern, while these games have been falling thick and fast, we still get an awful lot more magic going on. We're going to get a chance to see some more of that right now as we head across to our match with Luis Scott Vargas and Thiago Saporito. They've been waiting merrily. We can see a smiley face and a sad face in terms of the shape of the hands here. The sad face from Luis Scott Vargas, because he is on 6 cards in hand for this game. This is the very beginning of our game. A Windswept Heath coming down for Luis Scott Vargas in the early turns. Thiago Saporito also on Abzan. He's going to be trying to get something going here. Both these players starting off on fetch lands here. We see Luis Scott Vargas, incredible set of stats there. Just 33 years of age, just coming up for 500 pro points, likely to pick the last of those up at this very event. And Hall of Fame since 2013, but just this last season, his finishes would be enough that he would be contender for second Hall of Fame spot, if you will. Grimflare on the second turn from him, and that's potentially going to set up an awful lot of powerful plays for him in the turns that we've got coming up.
That's right, Tim. Grimflare, while not a card draw engine, it is a very good card selection engine, as well as filling the graveyard very quickly, which is super important given its own delirium ability, as well as cards like Tarmogoyf and Lingering Souls.
The big question, of course, will be how does Thiago Saporito's Disruption pair up against the threats of Luis Scott Vargas? Both of these decks have a fair amount of both Disruption to hand and removal, so do not be surprised if you see creatures not staying around on the battlefield for all too terribly long.
That's right. These are both very interactive decks. A lot of one-for-one trading going on in this matchup, and that really highlights why Lingering Souls is such an important card, because it is so difficult to trade one-for-one with those little individual tokens.
A new card, though, dealing with Grimflare, which in itself is a new card. Collective Brutality, one of the cards that has really pushed any of these black disruption decks. We saw it there, giving -2/-2 to Grimflare. That already pretty good. Saporito discarding a Plains to get a second ability on it. Looks at Luis Scott Vargas' hand, sees a Path to Exile there, consigns that one to the graveyard. Great little play there, because the extra land, not nearly as important as being able to strip a powerful spell from the hand of the Hall of Famer. Tarmogoyf comes down already with 4 different card types in the graveyard. A sorcery for Saporito and instance lands creature for Luis Scott Vargas. Tarmogoyfs on both sides. Conveniently, we know that they will bounce off one another, requiring pump spells to get around, but Abrupt Decay kills off one, a Path to Exile killing off the other, and helping out Luis Scott Vargas in terms of land here, because he certainly didn't have too much going on in terms of ability to cast spells previously. Kind of politely keeping revealed the cards that Thiago Saporito had seen with Collective Brutality, basically meaning that Thiago didn't need to keep them written down. Not something you need to do, but something that you sometimes see players doing just to kind of keep the pace of the game moving. And Luis Scott Vargas, one of the fastest players in the game. Next up from Tiago, that is a copy of Scavenging Ooze there. It's the promo version of Scavenging Ooze. Works just as well as the others in terms of eating creatures and indeed anything else from the graveyard, and pretty good against Lingering Souls if you can find a window to use it. Another Path to Exile coming down. So the Scavenging Ooze only really getting to eat that Grim Flayer, gaining a life for Saporito before it is sent off to exile.
Yeah, quite a nice pickup there for Luis in that Path to Exile that turn. He did have the Lingering Souls in his hand, which Tiago knew about, but didn't have enough mana to both play and flashback the Lingering Souls right away, which would have meant it would have been eaten by the Scavenging Ooze. So clearing away that Scavenging Ooze, essentially giving Luis access to 2 more Flying Spirit tokens. And now that the dust has settled a little bit with both players getting low on cards in hand, those Lingering Souls tokens are kind of the defining aspect of the game here.
Yeah, it seems funny that in a format with so many powerful cards that little 1/1 Flying Spirit tokens would be the defining factor, but Lingering Souls does produce quite a lot of them in a very efficient fashion. Abrupt Decay dealing with Tarmogoyf, but 4 tokens in play now for Luis Scott Vargas that could square up this match, which currently is being led by Saporito 1-0. Saporito with a Path to Exile in hand, but that's not really an ideal answer to all of these Lingering Souls tokens. He'll be looking for something a little bit higher impact there. Shambling Vent coming in. It does get dealt with by Path to Exile, 1 land begetting another. And a new Shambling Vent coming along for Luis Scott Vargas. Luis kind of having to have a really good day today here if he wants to keep the hopes of a top 4 alive, but certainly the sort of player that one can expect that possibility from. There we see Shambling Vent, the 2/3 lifelink land.
And Luis coming off of 3 consecutive Pro Tour top 8s. Certainly a player that has been known to go on runs here, and he does need, I believe, a 4-0 run in Modern today in order to have a chance at the top 4. So if you are out there cheering for Luis, give him all your energy here as we head into these Modern rounds here. But a nice, very, very nice pickup here for Tiago.
Yeah, Liliana of Lost Hope killing off one of the spirits and ending up with enough loyalty that it's going to require a full-on attack from Luis Scott Vargas. All of his spirits plus, well, 2 of his spirits plus Shambling Vent to be able to deal with what's going on. And yes, a Path to Exile from Luis Scott Vargas, enough to make sure that that attack does work out in spite of the Shambling Vent on the other side of the battlefield. I mean, this is kind of where the Abzan deck wants to be, forcing the other deck to top deck to find anything, meanwhile chipping through for damage, having already whittled down that hand, whittled down those resources.
Luis's draws have been pretty nice these past several turns here. Path to Exile is coming at key times here, and just being able to ride these Lingering Souls here to victory. I want to mention, I really like Tiago's inclusion of Liliana of the Last Hope here. It's a card we haven't necessarily seen a lot of in Modern just yet, but the fact that these type of Abzan mirrors are so often dominated by the card Lingering Souls, Liliana of the Last Hope is quite a nice card just to instantly pick off some tokens as well as generate some value from the graveyard, bringing back something like a Tarmogoyf or a Grim Flayer.
Grim Flayers briefly on both sides of the battlefield, though. Luis Scott Vargas having yet another Path to Exile to deal with, the one on Saporito's side. And once we hit this late game where Delirium is almost assured, Grim Flayer is attacking as a 4/4, which is actually a pretty gigantic threat.
No delirium, so 7.
Looks like no Delirium yet for Luis Scott Vargas, so he's just getting in for 7 here. 3 cards. How many of them are going to the graveyard? And what this means is that basically, for the rest of the game, Luis Scott Vargas is going to be drawing potent threats. He can choose to put lands in the graveyard if he doesn't think that he needs them. He can choose to make sure that the cards that he is drawing do a little bit more, and that enough to mean that Luis Scott Vargas squares things up here. It is now 1-1 between himself and the Brazilian Tiago Saporito.
2 fantastic players here, Tim, both on very similar decks, going into Game 3 tied 1 game apiece. Looking like an awesome match there. Can't wait to see that third game.
Yeah, Saporito, a player that from Brazil, I think some people are kind of seen as a bit of a dark horse in the tournament, but he has been at the top tables for a long while. This is not his first World Championship. He was here at PAX last year, and he definitely knows his way around this tournament. And with a deck provided to him by Willie Adel, Willie is a huge proponent of these kind of grindy green-black X decks. At various stages it's been joined. Right now, the Abzan list proving a little bit more popular. But as these players shuffle up, we get a chance to see a little bit of Kaladesh, because our theatre, the Paramount Theatre here in Seattle, has been just beautifully decorated to begin to give us a feel of what we've got coming in September. An entirely new face on Magic for a time. Now we're going to get a chance to see the kind of the happy side of things. The Eldrazi, you know, they've been sent away at least for now. And in the meantime, the Inventors Fair is starting, and we're going to get a chance to make some artifacts and enjoy Kaladesh.
Yeah, absolutely true there, Tim. The theater is looking fantastic. It's been a great weekend here at PAX. If you're in the area, definitely come down and check us out here. If you're not, stay tuned all weekend. There's a lot more content to come, both here at the World Championship and as our PAX panels and PAX previews unfold.
Yeah, it's been very cool. I mean, I think for the players in the room, they're really enjoying the vibe, the energy of it all. And also the fact that you can sit in a honest-to-goodness theatre on a gigantic, watching the stream live on a gigantic screen, in addition to all the panels that are going on. But outside, there's an Inventors Street Fair going on. We've got all sorts of play opportunities. It's a fantastic show. Shambling Vent, the start for Thiago Saporito in this deciding game. Just an overgrown tomb, untapped here for Luis Scott Vargas. Sorry, that's a Verdant Catacomb, so he may potentially be able to fetch a land. Grimflare coming down for Thiago Saporito here, so he has his early card selection all sorted, assuming that Luis Scott Vargas cannot find some kind of way of killing it off. We saw last game all of those Path to Exiles just doing exactly what Luis Scott Vargas needed, keeping the threats of Saporito off the board for long enough for him to be able to win things with Lingering Souls. And it looks like a reasonable mix of land and spells going on for Luis Scott Vargas. Let's see what he's got going on. Yes, Path to Exile is again a feature for Luis Scott Vargas. That going to mean that this Grimflare, unlikely to get as many hits in, if any hits in. I'm sure there's a temptation to deal with it before it's able to even get a single hit and get a bit of card selection for Saporito.
Very true, though, Tim. Though, do note that Luis had the option to Path to Exile that Grimflare at the end of Tiago's turn, opted not to do that, would rather untap, see what he draws that turn, perhaps draw into something like an Abrupt Decay and have a more efficient way of answering Grimflare. Often can be a big disadvantage to cast Path to Exile so early in the game, giving your opponent a crucial third or fourth land drop and ramping them into something big, but does ultimately go with the Path to Exile, correctly recognizes that getting hit with Grimflare, just giving the opponent too much card selection and graveyard advantage, and fires off the Path to Exile. But here comes Lingering Souls for Thiago Saporito. This was the key card we saw in Game 2. Now it is Thiago that has access to it and not Luis, and Luis looking to be in a little bit of a rougher position here.
Yeah, Liliana, the last hope in hand for Saporito, was a fantastic follow-up at some point relatively soon. It's going to be able to tick up, deal with some of the creatures, and Scavenging Ooze to eat the second half of Lingering Souls is kind of a nice pickup here. It doesn't look like it's doing too much, but actually it's kind of proactively dealing with two creatures there, in addition to getting a threat on the board that at some point could become problematic.
Yeah, fantastic pickup there for Luis. We do also see in Luis's hand, he does have an Engineered Explosives and Zealous Persecution, two cards that are excellent at taking out those spirit tokens from Lingering Souls. So Luis very clearly prepared here for the mirror match. I'm sure some combination of these are sideboard cards there that he has brought in, correctly recognizing Lingering Souls as one of the key cards in this matchup.
Yeah, I was talking to Luis before the tournament even began about Modern, and he said that Modern represents a really difficult challenge for these players in the World Championship. It is the format where making the right decision on deck is actually kind of a much bigger factor than it would be perhaps in Standard. There are lots of matchups that are potentially a lot sort of more one-sided. He went with Abzan because he feels like it's got a pretty good game against much of the field, but noted that there are a huge amount of different builds, and I'm sure that it's going to be worth your while, guys. At some point, check out the website. We will have all of the deck lists of all these players in Modern up available for you to have a look at if you're figuring out what you want to be playing in your Modern tournaments going forward. So Liliana has come down for Saporito. Meanwhile, Grimflayer available for Luis Scott Vargas here.
Both players sitting on fairly reactive hands here. Chock full of removal spells. Taking a look at what Tiago has. Path to Exile and Damnation, both options there. We may see Tiago actually kind of sitting back on Liliana here and waiting for Luis to maybe overextend a little bit into that Damnation, trying to get maximum value there.
The fact that Grimflayer has Trample is also a pretty relevant ability against the likes of these 1/1 tokens. Once Delirium is active and it becomes a 4/4, it's able to power on through a lot of creatures that would traditionally just be hard blockers against it, against other creatures in this kind of an Abzan mirror.
No Delirium yet active for Luis, so Liliana does cast Weakness on that Grimflayer, giving it -2/-1. And Tiago taking the opportunity while he has 5 lands now to cast Lingering Souls and immediately flash it back. Now Luis does have Scavenging Ooze, but since it's Tiago's turn, he can cast Lingering Souls, and as soon as it resolves, he has priority again. He can flash it back right away before Luis has a chance to exile it with that Scavenging Ooze.
Luis there choosing to just use Scavenging Ooze end of turn to get rid of even a land from Tiago Saporito's graveyard. A bit of respect for the likes of Grimflayer and I guess Tarmogoyf there, just wanting to make sure that there are as few resources available to Saporito as possible. And here's Zealous Persecution. Lo and behold, no spirits in play anymore. Now this Scavenging Ooze, it had -2/-1. It's got +1/+1 thanks to Zealous Persecution. So it's not able to fully kill off Liliana here, but, you know, put a little ding in there.
So it looks like Luis attacked Liliana for 3 with the Scavenging Ooze, +1/+1 from Zealous Persecution, and the Grimflayer actually went and hit Tiago himself. That's because Grimflayer actually needs to connect with a player in order to use its ability to look at the top 3 cards, put 2 in the graveyard and 1 back on top.
Two of those three did go back on top.
Back on top, yeah.
You have the option of however many you wish. In this case, he just put a creature in the graveyard, getting him 1 shot closer to Delirium. Also, I guess, if he needs putting an extra creature in the graveyard for Scavenging Ooze to eat. And here's Damnation. Luis just having a little think about responses here. He does have the Scavenging Ooze up as well as cards in hand. Taps a Beta Forest, uses it for green mana to eat Noble Hierarch. A parting gift from Scavenging Ooze, just the 1 life for Luis Scott Vargas. And Liliana still alive, now the only non-land permanent in play. Luis, he's got one of the reactive hands going on here. He can potentially activate Shambling Vent to attack Liliana. That won't quite kill the Planeswalker off. Saporito just looking on here. He's been playing decks like this in Modern basically the entire time that I've known him as a player, coming from the Willie Adel school of green-black control.
And now that Tiago has dealt with that Scavenging Ooze, that's a huge thing for him because he can start building up his graveyard now, start getting access to things like Tarmogoyf, getting access to Liliana's -2 ability down the road here. And Tiago with more cards in hand and looking like kind of a more proactive suite of threats here, looking to be in pretty good shape here.
Worth noting that Tiago Saporito, when asked how he did his various testing and preparation for the format, he said, you know what, for Modern, I just trusted Willie Adel. Willie Adel provided him with a deck list, and Tiago is relying on his experience with this kind of list in the past, rather than having ground out huge amounts of hours and days and weeks and months of testing with this list. Now, so far, we've seen him have fantastic results in the other formats, so it may well be that's paid off. But in the stretch here, it's really going to put a bit of pressure on him to hope that Willie has steered him correctly.
That's right. And Willie is here this weekend. I've seen him actually upstage in the balcony. He has been kind of serving as a mentor and a captain here, both for Thiago Saporito and Marcio Carvalho. I know there is a large contingent of both Brazilian and Portuguese Magic players out there cheering for these guys here in the World Championship. There's awesome community there, a lot of buzz and a lot of energy going toward these players here. So it's awesome to see them doing very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, Thiago Saporito is saying that one of his goals in Magic was to be a proud representative of South America, and he's very, very happy to be in the World Championship as just that. Path to Exile there, dealing with Shambling Vent. A slightly less exciting land coming down as a replacement for the 2/3 life-linking creature. Now, Luis Scott Vargas, at some point, he does really need to worry about this Liliana, even though otherwise the board pretty much approaching parity. Liliana ticking up every turn at some point will become a big problem.
And looks like Thiago Saporito actually with a second copy of Liliana in his hand, but this time it's Liliana of the Veil. And do remember, you cannot have two planeswalkers of the same character type on the battlefield at the same time. So that Liliana of the Veil kind of just waiting there in the wings in case Luis is able to take out Liliana, the Last Hope.
Yeah, it's not quite the legend rule. The legend rule relies purely on card name. This, the Planeswalker uniqueness rule. On the type line there, it tells you which Planeswalker it is. You can only have one name of Planeswalker in play.
And a big deal here, Luis has used Abrupt Decay to take out Liliana of the Last Hope. That unlocks the Liliana of the Veil in Thiago's hand, which may come down here, -2, and take out that Grim Flayer. Very big play here for Thiago, leaving Luis with no board.
Yeah, no way Luis could have known about that. He certainly needed to get that threat off the board. Just unfortunate how it played out for him.
And it's hard to overstate, the way these decks play against each other. There's so much one-for-oneing going on, and by that I mean a removal spell taking out a creature, a creature attacking back, taking out a planeswalker. That those kinds of little swings that mean a card on one side or the other are a huge determining factor in how these games play out in the mid-game.
Now, Gideon, ally of Zendikar, not a card that we would necessarily expect to see in Abzan, but looking fairly potent here, immediately coming down and putting a 2/2 white Knight ally token onto the battlefield. And it can relatively quickly create a board that the Abzan decks may find trouble dealing with.
That's right, Tim. Speaking of cards that can dominate an attrition-type game like this, Gideon being able to churn out tokens as well as representing a lot of damage very quickly. Just a huge kind of power play here for Luis.
Yeah, I believe that one a sideboard card that's come in, and I'm sure it's one that he was considering for exactly this matchup. They knew that this was going to be a big deck in the field. They had had a great weekend last weekend at all sorts of GPs, and Luis, nothing if not prepared.
It's interesting how much more reactive Luis has made his deck after sideboarding. We see cards like Zealous Persecution, Engineered Explosives, and Gideon, ally of Zendikar. I think that's Luis kind of correctly identifying what this matchup is all about, and there's kind of, Tim, this historically in Magic, this element of if you're playing kind of two mid-speed decks against one another, the one that is slightly slower and more powerful is going to have the edge because your opponent isn't going to be fast enough to come underneath you and kill you before you get all your cards online. So if you just kind of take a step back and go for more power and more reactiveness and more kind of value and card advantage, you will be able to grind out those longer games. And that's exactly what we're seeing here with Luis just piling onto the board here with these allied tokens and a Tarmogoyf as well.
Now, Saporito has Engineered Explosives in hand, and with these tokens on the board, there's a temptation to fire it off simply to kill them. But you know what? He's on 21 life. He may decide that he can do better taking down perhaps the Tarmogoyf. I mean, as long as Gideon is on the battlefield, killing just the tokens may just not be good enough. And Luis there, putting a die on his Tarmogoyf just to indicate to everyone at home quite how many card types there are in the graveyard. A full 6, making that a 6/7 Tarmogoyf. A big problem for Saporito. And Saporito, you can see him here reading that card in his hand intently. It's coming down. It's just a matter of how much mana is going to get spent on it. You can see Chapman Sim in the background. He's writing up a full text coverage of this feature match. So even those little moments of it that we may not have been able to see on camera, you will be able to read on our website very, very soon. And a big Lingering Souls coming along. That's a full 4 spirits. It gets cast and flashback basically immediately.
And we can see Tiago holding on to the engineered explosives in his hand here, opting not to cast that to take out either those Knight tokens or the Tarmogoyf, instead going for the Lingering Souls. I like this play a lot. Tiago is behind on cards. I think he wants to maximize the chances that Luis overextends into the engineered explosives, and so just getting a turn off here with the Lingering Souls to maybe chump block and buy some time a little bit, I think is kind of optimizes his chances to get back into this card advantage / value game.
Gideon getting stuck in though. Luis Scott Vargas, he's correctly realized that he's going to have to be the beatdown here for a little while. Now he's presenting a number of gigantic threats. Tiago blocking the Tarmogoyf and taking, well, a pretty sizable chunk here.
And note Tiago leaving 3 spirits on the battlefield to threaten that Gideon with an attack back here.
We, of course, know that there's a murderous cut in Luis Scott Vargas' hand.
Shambling Vent also being activated here ensures that if Luis has exactly 1 removal spell, that Gideon will still go down. Luis says okay.
And that a kind of nice one for Luis Scott Vargas. He had the removal spell because Tiago extended as far as he did. Essentially, there was no point playing the murderous cut. He's able to just keep that in hand, use it later. Engineered explosives deals with Tarmogoyf, and now it's just the 4 points coming through from Knight Ally tokens, and a Grimflare follow-up from Luis Scott Vargas. Just as well he didn't play it out earlier because it would have been another 2-drop dealt with by those engineered explosives.
4-4.
Now, I really like the way that both players played those last couple of turns there. Tiago being very careful to maximize the use of both his Lingering Souls and his engineered explosives. Now, Tiago's still very much on the back foot here, but he has brought things a little bit closer to parity, and with a couple strong top decks, he could be right back in this game. And it looks like, speaking of strong top decks, Gideon Ally of Zendikar for Tiago here. These Planeswalkers playing a huge role in this game here. Let's see what he decides to do with this.
All of the abilities on Gideon pretty attractive here. I mean, there's a 4/4 trampling Grimflare in play in addition to those 2 Knight Ally tokens. So getting stuck in perhaps not quite as exciting. At some point, Gideon's emblem obviously works fantastically with those flying spirits, but for now it is just a 2/2 white Knight Ally token.
So here's the trouble that Tiago has right here. He made the Ally token there. He needs to make sure he does not get hit by Luis's Grimflayer. A Grimflayer hit would just be devastating at this stage of the game, giving Luis so much card selection. However, Tiago also has to be thinking about a removal spell from Luis here. So when he lines up this block against the Grimflayer here, he really needs to make sure he doesn't leave himself vulnerable to a removal spell. And we do know that Luis has Murderous Cut in his hand.
Yeah, Murderous Cut can kill any one creature. Here we see the experience of Tiago Saporito as he lines up a gigantic block on this Grimflare.
And just a brilliant, brilliant play here by Tiago to make sure he doesn't get blown up by a removal spell there. Now, a couple turns ago, Luis did have the option to use Murderous Cut when Tiago was attacking Luis's Gideon. Luis did not use the Murderous Cut and also did not show any body language that he had it, but nonetheless, Tiago still choosing to play around that, does so correctly, is still able to take out the Grimflayer, ensure that he takes no trample damage there, and now the board has really equalized quite a bit here with things climbing in favor of Tiago Saporito. This is quite a game here, Tim.
Absolutely is. I think that in the last few turns, we've seen the lead swing pretty substantially, and Gideon Ally of Zendikar has basically been the reason on each and every occasion. Just providing such a persistent source of damage, really pushing the tempo of the game, forcing each player to become aggressive in a way that they might not otherwise want to, and that putting extra pressure on each player to find removal at key spots, and these players have found removal.
Absolutely true, Tim. And if you asked me maybe 3 or 4 turns ago, I would have said that the game was fairly in Luis's court here, that Luis was a strong favorite. But yeah, things have definitely equalized. I would even say Tiago might be the favorite here at this stage of the game. So very well done by him. And let's see what he can come up with this turn.
Collective Brutality here. And this, a nice one, he's discarding a land that he does not otherwise need. Saporito gives -2/-2 to Luis Scott Vargas's 1 lone creature, and he's checking out what's going on in Scott Vargas's hand. Just a land there too, But that at least means that he knows that the path is kind of clear.
Combat, we just want to make sure everything went correctly. We had Grimflayer was blocked by 2 spirits,
A 2/2 knight
2/2 knights,
and a 2/3 shambling vet.
Vent.
The shambling vet got Murderous Cut,
Mhm.
so the 2/2s and the 2/1/1s traded for the 4/4.
Okay, and then there were 2 knight allies, correct?
Oh, I didn't lose a knight ally.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so the knight ally was blocked by
A
s-
1/1
a
spirit.
spirit. Is that correct? Do you
Yeah,
recall
yes,
that?
yes.
All right, so where?
It's
how
his
far
turn.
have we gone beyond
It's his
that?
turn. It's his turn.
So you attacked past the turn,
And he drew for his turn and just played a spell.
and the
It
spell
was
you
collective
played
brutality.
was. Let's just see this real quick. And what are the modes you chose?
-2/-2. Look at my hand.
-2 on what?
On the knight that was in play. There's
Okay,
supposed to
so
be 2 knights.
the
in
one
play.
that went unblocked.
Yes.
All right, give me just a moment.
I'm supposed to have another knight in play.
So to clarify what's going on here, Judge just stepping in to make sure the previous combat went correctly. Does indeed look like there was a mistake in combat. In that combat, Luis was attacking with Grim Flayer and 2/2 Knight ally tokens. Now Tiago blocked and traded for the Grim Flayer, but accidentally the players actually removed
Just wanna
one
make
of the
sure
Knight
again,
ally tokens from the
after
battlefield as
combat,
well.
You passed the turn.
Yes.
Nothing else. You cast Collected Brutality on your turn, -2 on the remaining Knight ally, and discard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in this case, obviously we're going to issue all the appropriate warnings, and we're going to return the Knight ally to the battlefield.
So I had 2 and you killed 1.
Yeah.
Because you blocked a spirit on
Mhm.
1/1.
I know, but
Oh, and you get to put that. Okay. So he knows my card in hand.
Sorry, but
Okay, so it appears the resolution to this is we're going to rewind to before Tiago cast the
yeah, so
Collective
we're gonna
Brutality.
rewind the Collective Brutality.
We're going to return that second Knight ally token to the battlefield because it should not have died. And Tiago is going to have the option to do something different with his Collective Brutality if he wants to. Now, bear in mind this was just an oversight on both players' part. This wasn't anything, crazy or unusual going on here, just a legitimate oversight. And in this type of situation, if they can, the judges try to correct the game state back to what it should have been. So not too much damage done here, although Tiago does now know what card is in Luis's hand, so he can opt to do something different with the Collective Brutality. For example, he could drain 2 life, or simply keep that extra card in his hand.
12.
And looks like Tiago now doing the same play, except this time just choosing the life drain mode from Collective Brutality.
Ultimately, Luis Scott Vargas, well, I'm sure he's not super happy about having effectively revealed his hand for nothing. I don't think he's going to mind too much simply having a Knight ally in play here versus not. If he draws a removal spell here, then it means he's going to be able to kill off Gideon. Unfortunately for him, it is another land. 2 copies of Overgrown Tomb in hand, not where Luis wants to be.
And actually, a really relevant thing here, Tim. Note that Luis did not shuffle or mix up the 2 cards. Because Tiago knows that one of the cards is an Overgrown Tomb, Luis needs to make sure he doesn't mix up which one is which and then play the Overgrown Tomb that Tiago doesn't know about, thereby revealing that he still has another Overgrown Tomb in his hand. So really subtle thing there, but worth pointing out. And Tiago here actually just pressing the lead, picks up a Lingering Souls here, and things looking absolutely grim for Luis. He does extend the hand, and that will end the game here. So looks like not much changed based on the way that single turn played out there that we did get corrected. But ultimately it was Tiago that pulled back into the lead this game, and just an outstanding comeback, actually. Great game to watch there.
Because you got that extra information, which was like both our faults.
All right, so that is the end of this, our first round of Modern here in the World Championship. Fantastic round. We got to see a few interesting decks going on there. Very happy to see the likes of black-white tokens in the hand of Jiachen Tao, although ultimately, of course, Braun-Duin was able to do some pretty nice moves with the Eldrazi. But we've got plenty more Modern for you soon enough. But first, let's find out what's been going on the other back tables here at the World Championship.
Very much to Tim Willoughby and Ian Duke there. Great stuff in the first round of Modern. Now remember, we believe that 9 and 5 is round about the mark for top 4. Certainly if you get more than that, that's fantastic news. Right now we have 4 co-leaders of the World Championship. Marcio Carvalho, Shota Yasuoka, Lucas Blahon of the Czech Republic and Brian Braun-Duin of the United States are all at 8 wins and 3 losses. At 7 wins and 4 losses, just 1 win back, Seth Manfield, JC Tao, and now Thiago Saporito. Those are your front 7, all separated by just 1 match win with 3 rounds to go. Still alive, possibly Louis Scott Vargas at 6 and 5, possibly Mike Sigrist at 6 and 5. He beat Owen Turtenwald this round. Joel Larson from 1 and 5 is now up to 6 and 5. 5 wins in a row for the Swede. He defeated Paolo Vita Dama de Rosa this round. And Oliver Chu defeated in the rematch. He beat Steve Rubin. So Chu is up to 6-4 and 1. Rubin at 5-5 and 1 now. Probably struggling, but 2, 6-4 and 1 still very much alive. So that's the state here. We're going to turn the players round, but plenty of stuff to bring you here. And we've got lots of stuff from the world of Kaladesh coming this afternoon. Yesterday, we had our grand unveiling of Magic's newest set. And it's fair to say that the fans were pretty thrilled to see it. Take a look.
In this time when anything is buildable, you can invent your tomorrow today!
Yeah! Sick. Anything is buildable. People of Kaladesh, of course, live by this saying.
I love inventors. I love inventions. I think the set looks really neat.
So I got to see the trailer and all the pretty stuff, and it looks really cool, and I'm super excited for this set.
Just Kaladesh, the new mechanics, energy, vehicles, really colorful, vibrant world, which is pretty nice compared to like the Gothic horror stuff. It's a nice shift.
Ether is kind of the energy, the mayonnaise, and the negative space between planes. For Kaladesh, there's actually an ether sphere. As you go up into the sky, ribbons and swirls of ether peek through and have naturally encouraged the way the world looks. It lends itself to these wonderful swoops and meanders and swirls, and that's just the way the world looks because of the presence of ether. We have a new race that is the Etherborn, created specifically for Kaladesh. They are actually physical manifestations of the use of ether.
Very cool.
And this is the big one. Dwarves are back.
Yes! That's right, official confirmation that dwarves are in whites. This is awesome.
We really wanted to kind of commemorate and celebrate Kaladesh by creating a character for our pantheon of Planeswalker characters that is the living embodiment of the optimism and the inventiveness and the beauty and the hue of Kaladesh.
All right.
Okay.
Saheeli Rai, a brand new Planeswalker.
I like the way she looks. That is my contribution. Like, we can brainstorm some combos. They'll be bad. We'll crowdsource that. Someone help Jimmy with some combos, and I'm going to eat some crayons.
They need to be bad, though. I'm looking for the jankiest of jank.
Saheeli looks great. Love her outfit. I mean, that dress is fierce.
Seeing the new Planeswalker out there seems OP, but we'll see how it plays out.
You know, the Inventors Fair has so much going on. So some of the things we're going to see people racing around this racetrack called the Oval Chase. We'll get to see these inventive sculptures and entire buildings with these cool novel designs. We're going to see some really impressive constructs and automata.
Ghirapur has been the center of invention and innovation on Kaladesh for the last 60 years, this period called the Great Ether Boom. This is where I go into professor mode. So over the last 60 years, since the development of a new process to refine ether into a safe and reliable source of clean energy that has fueled all this invention that has mostly been concentrated in Ghirapur. So it's fitting that Ghirapur hosts this celebration of all that invention.
Now, Dovin is this Vidalcan planeswalker who belongs to the consulate on Kaladesh. And, you know, he's come here with a very delicate issue. So he's been tipped off that there's going to be some kind of threat to the Inventors Fair. And he's not sure what it is or when it's going to happen, but he needs some help in crushing that.
I want to show you this, guys. This is an energy symbol. It's a brand new resource, and this represents an energy symbol.
The, what did he call it? Mechanic E? The energy mechanic? That kind of blew my mind. Just some of the flexibility that gives you in your deck and the way that plays out. And it really spoke to some of the concepts that he was talking about, like that deck variance, right? The way that it plays. That's really exciting.
To explain the mechanic, could I show you a card? That'd be okay?
Yeah? Okay.
I think
I think
show you a
approval.
card.
Let's see it.
This is Etherworks Marvel. It's a legendary artifact. You pay 4 generic mana for it. Whenever a permanent you control is put into a graveyard, you get an energy counter. Everybody in this world uses technology. There's devices, there's gadgets. And how do we show that? So one way was +1/+1 counters.
Oh yeah, the fabricate mechanic where you could either get a +1/+1 counter on the creature or get an extra creature. And I kind of like the idea of these extra modes. You know, we've been seeing a lot of instants in the past, instants and sorceries, where you get a lot of different things that you can choose. And I feel like it's taking the game in such a direction in Standard that you're going to have just a lot of different possibilities for the game.
How do we show that creatures get better by using the technology? Ooh, they get +1/+1 counters.
So to enhance the gear on them.
Exactly, and you'll see if you look at all the art of all the creatures, everybody's decked out. This is a world of technology. You guys want to see a vehicle?
Yeah!
I'm most excited about the crew mechanic. That to me, it feels like a fixed banding, which is a mechanic that I did enjoy, and it's nice to see something similar to that get some more love.
If you crew it, so what that means is if you tap any number of creatures whose power is equal to or greater than the crew number, you crew it, you drive it, you turn it on. The idea of feeling like an inventor is not just the mechanics. We wanted to make sure that cards, we want to make sure there's a lot of build around cards, there are a lot of interesting decisions that happen mid-game where you have to make cool decisions that vary from game to game. That the idea of feeling like an inventor is throughout the entire set. You'll feel it in Limited, you'll feel it in Constructed. It is just oozing through the whole set, and it's a very different feel. I mean, it's hard to explain this to you guys play it, but the set feels unlike anything else. It's a really unique set, and it plays really differently. And so one of the things I'm excited for you guys to do is actually play with it, because it's an awesome set. It's a really, really good set.
The energy in this building was immense yesterday morning, and we've got so much more great stuff to bring you from the world of Kaladesh. Love what's been going across the screen. Hope you're paying attention to our little railroad tracks of stuff. What was that? The like gremlins happening over there in the Adaruba station. It's like, okay, glad I didn't come to work that way this morning. Anyway, we've got the players gearing up for round number 12. That's the second round of Modern. Why don't we take a look at our leaderboard for you and show you where things stand. A reminder, there are 4 co-leaders of the World Championship right now. If we were to cut to Final 4, right now 8-3 would be the record, but there are 3 rounds to go. Marcio Carvalho of Portugal, from the Czech Republic, Lucas Blahon, Braun-Duin of the United States, and Japan's Shota Yasuoka. It really is a true World Championship right now. The top 4 would spread the global message of Magic beautifully. 7-4, JC Tao, Seth Manfield, and Thiago Saporito after that pulsating game. Saporito against Luis Scott Vargas. Super tough loss for Luis. Commiserations to him. Congratulations to Saporito. Now, those 6 and 5s, Sigrist, Scott Vargas, Larson, well, we think they're still alive right now. We think that they can get to 9 wins, 9 and 5. And then one of the real question marks is what happens to Oliver Tew? Because he had that draw against Steve Rubin on the first day. If he can win out 9-4-1, he could really eliminate someone at 9 and 5. The draw could work yet in his favor. So that's the way things stand. Right now, one of our 4 co-leaders is waiting across the theatre in our Deck Tech studio. So let's find out what Lucas Blahon has brought to the Modern Party.